Hello everyone, welcome to another video on social science research methodologies. The subject of this presentation is research design, process, and life cycle. In this lecture I will explain to you the research process or the life cycle of a research from the first step being selecting the research topic until the end, which is writing the research report and findings. As you can see, there are commonly 8 steps involved in a research life cycle, starting from selecting the research topic or plotting the question to developing the research design, developing the sampling design, determining variables and study models, collecting the data, preparing the data, conducting data analysis, writing research report and findings. Let me explain each of these steps in further details. all um, all researchers start with the topic, with research topic. This can be in the form of a question, a research topic, or a problem to be presented, or a hypothesis claim. Allow me to show you a sample of how you can word this in a research paper. So it can go from something as, if you present it as a research topic, that you can say this research or this research will seek to study will seek to study will seek to study socioeconomics. It's just a topic. Or if you really want to drill down on a problem, you can say this research will seek to study the relationship between poverty and intellect. Or you can also present a question. For example, this research will seek to study the inquiry or the question whether there is a relationship between poverty and intellect. Or you can actually hypothesize by saying there is a significant relationship between poverty and intellect. So you're making a claim here in the hypothesis section. So again, the first part of any research starts with presenting a topic question, a research question, a problem question, or a hypothesis claim. The second step is deciding on the second step involves developing the study design. So here you're going to decide based on your topic what type of study you're going to be design you're going to be using. Since it's a socioeconomic topic, you will not be using any experimental design because, as you know, that experimental design is when you're introducing a change, when you introduce an experiment, and then you measure the effects of it. In this case, we have not introduced any change. We have not introduced poverty variable or a causier to check for the effect of intellect, or we did not introduce the intellect causier to check for the effect of poverty. Since we did not introduce any experiment, this fits perfectly for a design, observational design. So in other words, we are going to observe, we're going to collect data, or we're going to use the collected data to observe, to analyze this study. And also you will decide on the second phase whether you will be using what type of study you will be using. So second step, again, this will not be on your research paper. This is just a hint of what you can actually add, or what you can actually, and that you can actually build on this. So you can say something as, this research will focus on data collected on observation, collected on two separate, or collected by the by the Department of Labor, this research will focus on data collected by Department of Labor, and you can also say that this will be an observational study and and um, study and this research this and will will focus to produce, let's say, a survey study or a diagnostic study or a descriptive study. There's this study as a result. So again, the second step is where you develop the study design. What kind of design you're going to use for a study experiment, observation, and what type of analytical study that you're looking at. Because that's important, because the type of study, design and study that you select on step 2 will actually determine what step 3 should be. So in step 3, you're going to look at sampling design. So you're going to look at the data source. So now that you decided what your research topic will be and what your design will be, now you're going to talk about what's your sampling design. So where are you going to get your information? So again, this will kind of mimics the previous section where it will say the population, the samples we use in this study comes from the population in XYZ city or country. And again, if it's and you also have to clarify here who these participants are and what method are you going to use for sampling, and that will come second. Again, if it's experiment, then your subject of your experiment are human subjects, and if it's non-human subjects, then maybe it could be data objects for analysis and observations. So it all depends on what you will be using for your samples, for the ingredients of your analysis. Now let's move to the fourth. I'll have to reopen that sticky note. So the fourth one, the fourth step is determining variables and study models. So now you have to specify what variable you're going to use. So in this case, we're looking at two variables: poverty and intellect. These are two variables. These are two sides or two columns of your study. So one of these variables have to be an independent variable. One of them have to be dependent. One of them have to be the one that you use to check the cause on the effect on the other. So you have to determine what your variables will be. So in here you can add that the independent variable will be poverty, which will be used as a measure as a measuring a variable, or as a measuring as a measuring factor for intellect. In other words, the poverty variable will be used as an independent variable. The poverty analysis will be used as an independent variable to study the impact, to study its impact on intellect, which will be used as the dependent variable. So the wording doesn't really matter as long as you're able to convey what you're doing in terms of in your research and what your variables will be. Also here you will select what kind of models you will be using. So you can also add that this research will use, let's say, and you can add the model. Let's say if you would like to use regressional analysis, you can say we use regressional analysis to conduct study into correlationship between these two variables. So in regression analysis is one of the dozens of statistical models. If you will be doing a statistical analysis in your research design, in the research, then you can add that. But there are dozens of other data models and statistical analysis models that you can use. And then the fifth step is the collection of data. And again, the data you will have to explain here. Either your data came from a source that you didn't have to go and collect it, you don't have to go and do a survey, or if your data came from a survey. So if it came from survey, again, as I mentioned here, collect required data with special consideration to integrity and ethics involving gathering data. So when you gather data, especially from surveys, there are a certain set of protocols and procedures that you have to follow, and that you also have to mention those in your research paper, that you have actually abided by all those regulation and integrity and ethics. So, and if it comes from a data source, then you can just explain that what data source your data come from, and that you do not have to go to sample, and which organization institution keeps this data, and how they have actually collected these data. In either way, you have to provide some explanation about the integrity of data. So you could say the data were collected by XYZ institution that is actively studying socioeconomic indicators in XYZ place, right? The methodology used by the XYZ institution, right? To collect the sample survey data is, was let's say cluster sample, and then you can add additional explanation, how the clustering would happen and what area involved and what what stratification or clusters were used. Again, this is just only a drop of an ocean that you will write on your papers. And then number 6 is prepare the data, and this is where you're going to shift from like the paper, from the paper and writing more toward like action, where you will be using the data. You will be conducting a series of data preparation and transformation to make it ready for your analysis, because otherwise data in its raw nature or state is not usable for analysis. So each data will have to be prepared and transformed. So in this case, you could be using, if it's, let's say, blood, if you're a doctor and if it's blood, if it's a sample, or if it's any other physical test, then of course the samples will be done at a lab, or at a pharmaceutical machinery, right? But if it's data and a statistical material, then you're looking at a computation software or programming language. So here you will say that the data was transformed using such and such methodology, right? And you can also, in here, you can elaborate actually what you have done. If you change, let's say, if you took the logarithm of your data, if you changed the measures, if you had to get rid of, if you had to remove an outlier, or something was skewing your data, you had to remove that. If you had to trim the data from anywhere, if you had to change the data type from anywhere, so all of that information needs to be embedded here, so that it could be, again, this whole idea of adding all this information before analyzing and reporting your research, your study, is because at some point, because it's a scientific method, at some point another researcher should be able to use all these information that you put on your research paper, and go and replicate it and verify it or falsify it, but should be able to follow the same process. This is why it's very important that your research is very explicit, that there's nothing implicit in there, and everything is sufficiently and explicitly listed. So number 7 is data analysis. So this is, again, depending on the study, type of study and the planned outcome, you may use the state-of-the-art tools and techniques. So it depends, if it's human, like blood sample, or pathological, physical, physiological studies, then of course you're looking at labs. And if it's data related to, say, In my case, it's socioeconomics, econometrics. Then I'm dealing with computational measurement softwares or programming languages to conduct my studies. So in this case, you would say this is, and again, this is where you're going to embed not only analysis but also charts, trends, crosstabs, whatever you think is necessary to actually to establish your analysis, right? This is where you're going to add all your backup, all your data, all your evidence, all your data-driven evidences, for the sake of, for lack of a better word. So you would say the analysis was conducted with on, let's say, on R studio. um, the researcher, let's say, performed XYZ model where, then you're going to provide p-value information or any statistical information that you need to, and at some point you have to be able to explain the researcher, let's say, failed to reject the null, or I can say the researcher can reject the null hypothesis, and 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 accept the hypothesis that hypothetical claim that there is significant relationship between poverty and intellect. So again, this part will have a lot of technical, mathematical, statistical, analytical information that will help the next step. Again, step 7, where the analysis of data is conducted, is where all of your technical, statistical, data-driven, computational measurements and models and analyses will be embedded, which will become the foundation for the step 8, where you provide, where you report your discoveries. And let me move to step 8. And let me bring the so step 8 again. This is where you are going to write your discoveries. You're going to report it, and again, in step 8, one of my tips is that you should try to write your reports as simply as possible. I know step 7 involves a lot of addition of a lot of technical materials, but in step 8 you can actually simplify that by writing a report that's simple that could be simply understood. Or I'm not saying very simple, but depending on the context or the domain where you're writing the report, you should report the analysis, so that if somebody's reading your research who's not expert in a technical and scientific research, should be able to get a good glimpse or understand or the main discoveries and findings of your research by reading the last step, which is step 8. And again, how you write the report from step 1 all the way to step 8, especially with step 8, it's dependent on how your style is and how you would like to write the report. But one thing I want to mention, that academic and professional industries, they have their own writing styles and protocols for report writing. So a lot of industries are open, they're lenient toward however you write the report, as long as you're able to convey your analyses professionally. But the academic institutions, they are a little bit strict with certain guidelines and formatting protocols that need to be followed for report writing, especially using the MLA, APA, and stuff like that, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So keep that in mind while you're writing your report in step 8. So again, step 8 could go something as the result of this analysis, or you can say the analysis shows that or indicates that, and whatever it is, just a brief of everything that you have mentioned in between step 7, 6, and 7, will come here. And also step 8 is where you also going to suggest, like, the research, this research, like this is where you're going to suggest additional research on top of what you have done research. Because again, education, knowledge is never final, science is never final, they're never ultimate. So there's always continuously building. So this research that you've just typed is not final, is not proven, it's not it. So this will be, not only will this be put forward for verifiability and falsifiability, but also this will be a continuous paper, a continuous knowledge which you just produced, that will be worked on, that will be built upon by other scientists, other researchers. So if there's anything interesting that you found during the research, this is where you can actually add and say that, let's say this research also suggests that let's say XX and YY variables need to be factored in uh, for, let's say, XX impacts. So any variables that missed this research, or that you found during the research, that need to be studied as a cofactor, as a covariable, as a confounding variable, they need to mention it here, so that the next researcher who reads your research and wants to replicate your work can also have this in mind, that actually this can be developed into further to produce more knowledge of this topic. With all that being said, I hope that this was a helpful video in terms of understanding the research life cycle. Thank you for your time.